Today's video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Head on over to cardkingdom.com to pre-order your Zendikar Rising cards today. Hey friends, it's Tomer, and I've got another quick list for you. Here are 5 blue hidden gems in Commander currently under $5. I define hidden gem as any card that sees less than 1% representation in decks found in EDH Rec's database, and I put them together in lists because people really like lists. With that out of the way, let's check out the cards. Kicking things off, we've got Quiet Speculation, which is definitely one of the most underrated cards in Commander. Being able to tutor up 3 cards for just 2 mana is an absurdly good rate in a 100 card singleton format, yet hardly anyone is playing this old school card. To be fair, Speculation does come with significant restrictions. You can only tutor cards with flashback and they go into your graveyard instead of hand. But to be fairer, while many of the flashback cards suck, there's more than enough that are actually quite powerful, and the fact that not only can flashback cards be inherently cast from the graveyard, but actually some of them get way better if cast this way, like Echo of Eons, Deep Analysis, and Unburial Rites, putting them directly into the graveyard is often a benefit rather than a drawback. While your average blue deck doesn't generally run cards with flashback, there's at least one popular archetype that certainly should be, Spellslinger. All flashback cards are instants or sorceries, which is exactly what these Spellslinger decks want to fill up on, so running a little flashback package can add a lot of extra power to your deck. Some of my favorite flashback cards in blue include Deep Analysis, Echo of Eons, Flash of Insight, and Mass Diminish, but things get way more interesting once you start adding extra colors. Lots of Spellslinger decks are also in red, which gives you more ways to loot away flashback cards to cast from your graveyard later on, like Faithless Looting, but also gives you access to powerhouse Spellslinger cards like Increasing Vengeance, Seize the Day, and best of all, Past in Flames. There's good flashback cards in other colors as well, but Izzet definitely is the strongest base for a powerful Quiet Speculation flashback package. I'm more than happy to run Quiet Speculation in just about any Spellslinger deck, but particularly ones that have access to red like Seven, the Chronoclasm, Kess Dissonant Mage, and Niv Mizzet Perun. Speaking of Spellslinger, here's another old favorite of mine for the archetype. Spellweaver Volute is a bizarre aura that enchants an instant card in any graveyard. Whenever you cast a sorcery spell, you may cast an enchanted instant for free, exiling it and then attaching Volute to another instant card in a graveyard. So what we've got here is a repeatable flashback engine for instant cards whenever you cast a sorcery. The fun times keep going until either you run out of instants to enchant or sorceries to cast, but that shouldn't be a problem in most Spellslinger decks, which are full of both instants and sorceries. Also keep in mind that you can cast your opponent's instants with this card as well, not just your own, greatly expanding the value you can get from Volute. Honestly, there's not much bad I can say about this card. It costs 5 mana and it requires a setup of having instants in graveyards and sorceries to cast, but despite all these shortcomings, it's an incredibly powerful engine that helps your Spellslinger deck bury your opponents in card advantage. Any blue Spellslinger deck that runs a good mix of instants and sorceries should definitely consider Spellweaver Volute, like Kess Dissonant Mage, Niv Mizzet Perun, and Mizzix of the Magnus. Number 3 is a really obscure one with Fade Away. Fade Away is just not something people play around, let alone know exist. I swear I've blown out my opponents with this obscure blue common more times than I can count. The more creatures your opponents commit to the battlefield, the more Fade Away punishes them, and heaven forbid if they're fully tapped out when you cast it, or else they're going to sacrifice a lot of permanents. As sweet as this card is, Fade Away isn't exactly a creature board wipe, even though it usually acts as one. Each player chooses what permanents they sacrifice, so while they do have to sacrifice something, they don't necessarily have to sacrifice a creature that they want to keep around. And Fade Away is obviously ineffective against opponents that have mana to pay its cost. Even so, this is a pseudo board wipe in blue with an extremely powerful effect for just 3 mana. 3 mana, that's it! Fade Away is an excellent inclusion in any blue deck that doesn't run a lot of creatures. It's particularly appealing in mono blue or Simic decks which don't have access to the best creature board wipes. Baral Chief of Compliance and Tetyova Benthic Druid are just 2 of the commanders where I'll usually jam Fade Away at the first opportunity. Number 4 is Vanishing, a weird and wonderful old school aura. You can pay double blue to make the enchanted creature phase out, a super old mechanic that hardly anyone these days knows about, but has recently started popping up again on a few newer cards like Teferi's Protection. Basically, phasing out means the creature and everything attached to it ceases to exist. It doesn't change zones, it just goes poof, totally gone, and can't be interacted with in any way until it phases back in at the beginning of its controller's next turn. Vanishing has two main uses. The first and most used option is as protection. Slap this baby onto your most important creature and is basically immune to any form of removal as long as you have mana. Targeted removal, board wipes, sacrifice, it doesn't matter. You just pay double blue and the creature phases out, dodging everything until it phases back in. For blue heavy decks that really need their commander to stick around, Vanishing is the ultimate form of protection. It requires you to keep mana up to use it, but if you have the mana, then the enchanted creature just ain't dying. The second, more nefarious use of Vanishing is sticking it onto an enemy commander you want gone, phasing it out whenever you want to. After all, killing an opposing commander with a removal spell lets that commander go back to the command zone to be recast later, but phasing it out doesn't have the creature change zones, so it can't go back to the command zone. So as long as you're willing to pay double blue each turn, you can have your opponent's commander phased out and inaccessible for pretty much the entire game. Devious. Vanishing is most powerful in Etrata the Silencer and Braid's Conjurer Adept as cheeky ways to skirt their downsides, but any blue heavy deck focused on their commander can get great use out of it, such as Zur the Enchanter and my husbando, Daxos of Meletis. Rounding out today's list is Insight. Fans of the hugely popular commander channel Command Zone might remember a recent episode where the obscure color hoser Reap was mentioned as an underrated recursion option in green decks with black heavy metas, immediately spiking a card that was once worth pennies into a $6 card. While Reap is indeed pretty sweet, I think I have something even sweeter with Insight, which comes from the same color hoser cycle as Reap. And fortunately for you, dear readers, I do not have the level of influence as Command Zone, so this card's price isn't going to budge from me mentioning it. Just like Reap, Insight's power is dependent on your own meta, in this case requiring your opponents to run green. Thankfully, green is a really good color and is well represented in most playgroups. Plopping down Insight against just one green opponent is a recipe for tons of card draw, but if you're up against multiple opponents running green, then this enchantment is downright absurd, eclipsing even the best blue draw options in the format like Rhystic Study. With how common green decks are in the format, I'd recommend trying out Insight in pretty much any playgroup unless you know your specific meta is lacking in green opponents. The risk of it being a dud in some games is worth it due to how insane it is at the right table. It's cheap and splashable, so it can easily slot into any blue deck, but being an enchantment makes it particularly juicy in Enchantress decks like Zur the Enchanter and Tuvasa the Sunlit, but it reaches maximum spice levels in Blind Seer decks, which run cards like Glamouredye, so you can change Insight to trigger off whatever the most popular color is that your opponents are running in the current game, so it's always going to be absurd. So those are 5 sweet budget cards that deserve more love. There's certainly a lot more out there, so let me know what your favorite ones are in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, friends, see ya! Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up with the latest and greatest, click on the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to check out similar videos, click on the links here and here.